The sky above her floating city is slowly going dark. High above the clouds, a young star builder apprentice named Elara makes a choice that could cost her everything. She ignores her master's stern warnings and begins to climb the celestial spire alone. Her city depends on starlight to stay aloft, and the heavens are fading. If she fails, the entire city could fall into the abyss below. She touches a cold, ancient glyph on the spire's surface, and it begins to glow with a faint, hopeful light. By the end of this journey, you will uncover the forgotten secrets of the star builders and the true purpose of the temples in the sky. What ancient knowledge was lost that caused the stars themselves to dim. Wherever you are in the world right now, and whatever the hour, feel free to share your quiet corner of the night with us. What does the silence of forgotten places whisper to you? A low hum resonated through her fingertips as Elara traced the glowing lines. The stone felt alive, thrumming with a power she had only ever read about in crumbling scrolls. Under her touch, the intricate patterns flared, their light pulsing in time with her own heartbeat. A seam appeared in the flawless rock, a vertical line of pure radiance that widened into a doorway. Beyond it lay not darkness, but a soft, ambient glow, revealing a chamber untouched for centuries. It was an archive, a place of lost knowledge, but the sound of grinding stone echoed from the spire's exterior. The Watchers, silent statues carved into the walls, were beginning to move. Their heavy, deliberate steps vibrated through the floor. Her breath caught, a primal instinct screaming at her to run, to hide from these ancient guardians. Yet the soft light from the archive called to her, a siren song of answers. She made her choice. In one fluid motion, she slipped through the glowing doorway, her form swallowed by the chamber within. The entrance sealed behind her with a whisper, leaving no trace of her passage, but she was not safe. She could hear them now, the rhythmic, scraping footfalls of the Watchers, taking up a new patrol just outside. They knew the spire had been breached. Her quiet exploration had just become a desperate race. She was trapped inside with the secrets, and the only way out was through the very guardians she had awakened. The archive was vast, its air thick with the scent of ozone and old parchment. It held more than just answers. It held the reason the stars were failing. The air in the archive was still and heavy, a deep velvet black that seemed to swallow all sound. Elara took a slow, steadying breath and raised her hands. From her palms, a soft, focused beam of starlight pierced the darkness, a solitary sunbeam in a long sealed tomb. The light swept across the chamber, glinting off something immense and geometric at the very center. It was an orrery, a model of the heavens so vast its crystalline rings reached for the shadowed ceiling. Each arm set with stars carved from gems that had not seen light in generations. As her beam of light traced its form, the entire structure began to hum, the gems flickering to life, one by one. Then, with a silent rush of energy, a star map bloomed above it, an intricate web of silver lines and shimmering constellations that filled the cavernous space. The sight was breathtaking, a vision of a sky no one living had ever seen, but the effort of summoning and holding the light had a cost. A wave of profound weariness washed over her, a deep, cold drain that made her knees tremble. Her personal reserves of celestial energy, the very power that kept her aloft, were dangerously low. A desperate conflict tore at her. Her body screamed for rest, for a moment to recover, but her mind screamed louder. This projection was temporary. It was already beginning to flicker at the edges, the silver lines wavering like mist. She had to memorize it, every arc and junction, but its complexity was overwhelming. There was no time for doubt. Pushing through the fog of exhaustion, her eyes darted around the chamber, searching for anything she could use. She spotted a patch of faintly glowing moss clinging to a stone ledge. Scrambling over, she scraped a generous handful into a scrap of cloth torn from her tunic. Ignoring the trembling in her hands, she began to trace. She pressed the luminescent moss against the fabric, sketching the most critical pathways of the star map as it shimmered overhead. It was a crude method, but it was all she had. She worked with frantic precision, her focus so absolute that the growing ache in her limbs faded to a distant thrum. As the final line of the projection dissolved into nothingness, she slumped against the cold base of the orrery, her makeshift map clutched tightly in her hand. The effort had left her visibly weakened, her breathing shallow, but in the faint green glow of her sketch, she saw the true urgency. The map did not just point to a single dormant temple. It charted a sequence, and the key to awakening the first one was a specific celestial alignment, a convergence of planets and stars that the orrery indicated was only days away. Her quiet quest had just become a race against the heavens themselves. A low grinding of stone echoed from the archway she had entered, a sound far too close. The heavy, deliberate footfalls of a watcher entered the archive, its massive stone form silhouetted against the faint outer glow. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. In an instant, she extinguished the starlight in her palms, plunging the chamber back into near total darkness, and scrambled behind the massive base of the orrery. She pressed herself into the cold, unyielding stone, her breath held tight in her chest. The watcher paused just inside the chamber, its featureless head tilting with an unnerving, deliberate slowness. It stood perfectly still, as if listening for the whisper of a heartbeat or the rustle of cloth. The only sound was the faint hum of the dormant orrery and the frantic pulse in her own ears. For a long, agonizing moment, she was certain it could sense her. Then, with another grating step, it turned and moved back toward the entrance. Relief was a fleeting, cold sensation. The watcher did not leave. It took up a new post just outside the doorway, its broad back now completely blocking her only known way out. A wave of cold dread washed over her, the sheer weight of the ancient stone around her pressing in. The air felt thinner, the darkness more absolute. She was truly trapped. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Closing her eyes for a brief second, she forced her breathing to steady, focusing on the rough texture of the stone against her back and the solid feel of the moss-stained map in her hand. She could not go back. The only direction left was forward, deeper into the unknown heart of the archive. Pushing away from the orrery, she moved with a new, cautious purpose, her hands outstretched in the blackness to feel her way. Each step was a calculated risk, her ears straining for any shift in the watcher's posture. The deeper chambers were less maintained, the air growing thick with the dust of ages. Her foot brushed against a loose piece of carved masonry, sending it skittering with a faint clatter that sounded like a thunderclap in the silence. She froze. From the entrance, she heard the distinct sound of the Watcher's head turning, its stone neck grinding. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the floor, a signal. It was answered by another, and then another, from deeper within the spire. Her simple trespass was no longer a secret. She had triggered a higher state of alert, awakening more of the ancient guardians. Her time had just evaporated. Her escape needed to be immediate and utterly silent, a race not just against the celestial clock, but against the very stones that surrounded her. The deeper chamber was a pocket of undisturbed time. Elara's faint starlight fell upon a silent figure seated against the far wall, its form draped in the tattered remnants of a master builder's robes. She approached with a reverence reserved for sacred spaces, her earlier fear replaced by a profound sense of meeting a ghost. In the figure's lap lay a leather-bound journal, its cover thick with dust, and clutched in one skeletal hand was a stylus, as if the writer had paused mid-thought, forever. Her breath caught not in horror, but in a shared, timeless moment of dedication. This was one of the first builders. Carefully, she lifted the journal. The pages crackled with age, filled not just with words, but with breathtakingly intricate sketches of celestial mechanics and energy flows that made her own training seem like child's play. The core theory was one of cosmic music. The temples she rid were never mere power generators. They were tuning forks for the galaxy, their hum maintaining a perfect frequency known as the Great Resonance. This harmonic field kept the stars in their celestial dance, their light bright and constant, but the journal's tone grew increasingly frantic in its later entries. It spoke of a dissonance, a wrong note in the symphony that the temples could not correct. The stars were slowly, imperceptibly, falling out of tune. Then she found the final entry. The handwriting was a desperate scrawl, describing a last, desperate attempt to re-establish harmony by overloading a primary temple's core. The writer called it the Shattering Song, a blast of pure, discordant energy that did not fix the problem. It silenced the temples entirely, severing the connection and causing the Great Resonance to fail. The very solution they attempted had become the cause of the long, slow dimming. A cold dread, colder than the chamber's air, settled in her chest. If she succeeded in awakening the temples, would she simply repeat their fatal mistake? Would her own song of renewal become another shattering chord that doomed the sky? For a long moment, she stood frozen, the weight of the journal in her hands feeling like the weight of the world. To proceed was to risk an unimaginable catastrophe. But to do nothing was to accept a guaranteed, slow death for her city and every light in the heavens. The skeleton before her was not a warning to stop. It was a lesson from a failed attempt. She closed the journal and tucked it securely into her tunic, the decision solidifying her path. She would not repeat their error. She would learn from it. Her quest was no longer about simple repair. It had become a moral choice, a responsibility to find a new way to sing the stars back to life, knowing that one wrong note could have consequences that echoed across the galaxy. The old observatory was a sanctuary of quiet calculation, but the air grew cold as Elara laid the journal and her moss-stained map before Master Kale. She spoke of the archive, the first builder, the Great Resonance, and the fatal Shattering Song. She expected wonder, perhaps even pride. Instead, a storm gathered in his eyes. He did not touch the artifacts. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. His voice was low and sharp, each word a shard of ice. You broke a sacred law, Elara. You risked your life and the city's safety for a ghost story. The ancients were arrogant. Their knowledge was their downfall. This, he said, gesturing to the journal, is a record of that pride. He snatched the leather-bound book from the table, his grip firm. This pursuit ends now. I forbid you from speaking of this folly again. The finality in his tone was a physical blow, severing the bond of trust they had built over years. Her hope crumbled into a hollow ache. To obey him was to accept a slow, silent end. To defy him was to lose the only guide she had ever known. She lowered her gaze, her voice a whisper of submission. I understand, Master. The words tasted like ash. It was the first true lie she had ever told him. As he turned away, the journal safely locked in his possession, a new resolve crystallized within her. She would not abandon the path. She would walk it alone. That night, the familiar corridors of the floating city felt alien and hostile. Every shadow seemed to hold Kale's disapproving gaze. Her mission was now a secret, and without her master's resources or guidance, every step forward would be exponentially more perilous. She had the map, but she had no one to watch her back, no one to share the burden of this terrible knowledge. The loneliness was a heavier weight than any stone. She needed an ally, someone who understood the old ways, someone who would listen. Her thoughts turned to the city's lower levels, to the reclusive archivist named Lyra, a woman who spoke more to old scrolls than to people. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only one she had left. The central star lens was a monument of perfect geometry, its polished crystal facets channeling the city's dwindling light. Elara's hands moved through the daily maintenance routine, a ritual of cleansing and calibration. But today, her fingers registered something new. A faint, discordant hum traveled up her arms, a vibration so subtle it was felt more than heard. It was a jarring sensation, like a single instrument playing out of tune in a grand orchestra. She froze, her breath catching. This was no mere mechanical fault. It was a physical tremor, a tiny, localized echo of the Shattering Song the first builder had described. The journal's abstract warning was now a tangible truth, vibrating in her very bones. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. If this dissonance was manifesting here, in the city's heart, then the decay was not just real, it was accelerating. For a terrifying moment, Master Kale's voice echoed in her mind. Was this arrogance? Was she, like the ancients, seeing a problem only she believed she could fix, blind to the risks? The fear was a heavy cloak, threatening to paralyze her, but as the uneven vibration continued to prickle against her skin, another feeling rose to meet it, a quiet and stubborn certainty. She could not unfeel this. She could not pretend it away. Trusting her own senses over her master's dismissal, she made a choice. Her fingers, now moving with deliberate purpose, made a series of minute adjustments to the lens alignment. She did not try to overpower the vibration, but to gently counter its rhythm, to introduce a soft, opposing harmony. It was a tiny act of rebellion, a whisper against a scream. For a single, heart-stopping second, the entire lens flared with a visible ripple of light, a brief, shimmering wave that made the anomalous vibration clear for anyone to see. Then it was gone. The discordant hum softened into a smoother, more stable tone. The correction had worked, but in that moment of success, she had also illuminated her secret. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision made her heart leap. Someone else had been in the chamber, watching from the shadows. Her small, quiet defiance was no longer invisible. Lyra's workshop was a cave of paper and memory, tucked into the city's forgotten rim, where the wind hummed a constant, lonely tune. The old cartographer looked up from her desk, her eyes sharp and assessing, as Elara unrolled the moss-stained cloth. She did not speak, but her fingers, stained with ink, traced the glowing pathways with a slow, reverent care. "You understand this?" Elara whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of hanging charts. "I need to know how to reach the first temple." Lyra's gaze lifted from the map to Elara's face, searching for the story she was not being told. "The stars are failing," Elara insisted, her words measured. "This alignment is our only chance." She spoke of the celestial clock, of the dwindling light, but she carefully omitted any mention of the journal, the first builder, and her master's stern prohibition. It was a half-truth, a necessary shield to protect this fragile new alliance. Lyra studied her for a long, silent moment, the weight of the unspoken hanging between them. Finally, with a slow nod, she turned to a massive cabinet, pulling out scrolls of atmospheric parchment. "I can show you a path," she said, her voice like dry leaves. "But the sky is not empty." She unrolled a new chart, this one alive with swirling, painted lines of violet and deep blue. "These are the razor winds," she explained, pointing to jagged patterns. "They shift without warning and can tear a glider to splinters. And here, these calm, green stretches are an illusion. They are dead zones, where the air is too thin to hold you aloft." Her help was not a blessing, but a warning etched in ink and experience. With Lyra's precise annotations now marking her own map, Elara's quest was transformed. It was no longer a hopeful idea, but a tangible, dangerous route across a hostile sky. The risk was no longer just getting caught. It was the very real possibility of getting lost, or falling, swallowed by the vast and unforgiving abyss between the city and the distant, dormant temple. The textile market was a cascade of color and sound, a place where starlight was woven into tapestries of breathtaking complexity. Elara moved through the crowded stalls with a singular purpose, her gaze fixed on the work of a master artisan named Fen. His latest piece, a vast hanging depicting the city's founding, was marred by a section of dead threads, its light extinguished like a forgotten constellation. This was her opportunity. She approached him not as a star builder, but as a fellow craftsperson, offering to mend the flaw in exchange for the use of his small, personal skiff. Fen, a man whose eyes held the same deep curiosity as the archivist Lyra, studied her for a long moment before agreeing. He was not interested in coin. He was fascinated by the old ways, the patterns of light that modern builders had long since abandoned. The deal was struck, but the true test began immediately. Her repairs had to be conducted right there in his open stall, under the watchful eyes of any passerby. Every flicker of light from her fingertips, every subtle realignment of the luminous threads, was a potential beacon announcing her unauthorized use of celestial craft. She worked with a focused intensity, her hands moving with a precision born of years of training. yet applied now in a context far outside her master's approval. The pressure was immense, a silent countdown measured in the anxious beats of her own heart. One misplaced thread, one surge of uncontrolled energy, and the entire tapestry could unravel, exposing her secret and her defiance. Yet as she worked, a strange calm settled over her. This was not the abstract theory of the archives or the cold mechanics of the star lens. This was creation, a direct, intangible act of mending. She guided the dormant threads back into harmony, their light rekindling in a soft, cascading wave that flowed from her hands. The dead patch in the tapestry bloomed with renewed radiance, its pattern now more vibrant and true than the sections surrounding it. Fen watched, his initial skepticism melting into open admiration. He saw not just a repair, but an artist's touch, a depth of understanding he thought lost to time. In gratitude, and perhaps sensing the danger of her journey, he presented her with a gift. It was a cloak, woven from a special thread that seemed to drink the light. When she draped it over her shoulders, its color shifted, blending subtly with the hues of the sky behind her. It was not true invisibility, but a powerful camouflage, a weaver's trick that could mean the difference between being seen and remaining a secret against the vast canvas of the heavens. She had earned her passage. The small, sleek skiff was now hers to command, but as she finalized the arrangement, she noticed a figure across the market, a lower-level apprentice from the Star Builders Guild, who had paused to watch the final moments of the weaving. The exchange had not gone entirely unnoticed. Her conspiracy, once a solitary burden, was now a web with another fragile thread, one that could be pulled at any moment by a careless word or a curious inquiry. She had the tools for her journey, but the shadow of discovery had grown longer, stretching from the silent spire all the way to the bustling heart of the city's market. The borrowed skiff slipped from the city's edge into a sea of absolute black. There were no stars to guide her, only the faint, moss-green glow of her map and the painted lines on Lyra's charts. Each gust of wind was a physical force, a sudden shove that tilted the small craft and sent her heart into her throat. The city shrank rapidly behind her, its familiar lights becoming a distant, glittering smudge against the endless dark, a single lit window in a universe of emptiness. The silence was immense, a pressure against her ears more deafening than any sound. It was just her, the fragile hum of the skiff's core, and a vertigo so profound it threatened to unravel her concentration. The drop below was not a concept, but a presence, a hungry void waiting for a single mistake. Her knuckles were white on the control bar, every muscle tensed against the skiff's shuddering. This was not like maintaining a stable lens in the safety of the observatory. This was raw, untamed sky, and her life depended on imposing order upon its chaos. She closed her eyes for a single, steadying moment, forcing her breathing to slow. She reached out with her senses, not with her hands, but with the part of her that understood energy and resonance. She listened to the skiff's core, feeling its rhythmic pulse, and began to make minute adjustments. It was a delicate dance, a star builder's craft applied to survival. She didn't fight the wind, but learned its rhythm, her hands gently guiding the skiff to ride the turbulent currents rather than resist them. The violent shudders softened into a steady, thrumming vibration. She was flying, truly flying, by her own skill and will. but the triumph was cold and solitary. The glittering city was now just a pinprick of light, and the path ahead was a featureless black. Turning back was a physical possibility, but it was no longer an option in her heart. To return was to admit defeat, to surrender to the slow dimming and her master's dismissal. She was committed, a single spark of defiance moving through an infinite night. Her only companions, the ghost of a failed builder and the fragile hope etched on a piece of cloth. The first trial was not reaching the temple, but simply enduring the terrifying, magnificent solitude of the journey itself. The blackness before her shattered into a million glittering spears. It was a shard rain, a storm of crystallized light fragments that hissed against the skiff's hull like angry hornets. A sharp crack echoed as a larger piece struck a wing strut, sending a tremor through the entire craft. Instinct took over. Elara's hands shot out, palms forward, releasing controlled bursts of starlight to deflect the deadliest shards. Each flash was a small, costly explosion of her personal energy, a resource already depleted from her long flight. She could feel the drain with every pulse, a cold hollowing in her chest. It was a desperate equation, a terrible balance between protecting the skiff now and having enough strength to reach the temple later. The storm offered no reprieve, the glittering onslaught intensifying. Her eyes darted across the instruments, searching for any escape. The lower cloud bank, a thick, murky gray, seemed her only option. It was a gamble. Diving into that obscurity meant sacrificing precious altitude, and with it, her clear view of the celestial markers on her map. But staying in the open meant being shredded. Gritting her teeth, she wrenched the control bar, sending the skiff into a steep, spiraling dive. The world became a roaring, gray blur. The shard rain lessened, its sharp hisses muffled by the thick vapor, but the turbulence was worse, a violent churning that threatened to tear the craft apart at its seams. When she finally leveled out, the silence was sudden and profound. The skiff drifted in a featureless gray void. A quick assessment confirmed her fears. The port stabilizer was damaged, and her own energy reserves were critically low, leaving her with a deep, bone-weary chill. She had escaped immediate destruction, but she was now lost, wounded, and desperately vulnerable, a single spark adrift in an endless sea of mist. The environment was no longer a backdrop. It had become an active, intelligent enemy. Her next move was not about navigation, but simple survival. She had to find a place to land, to rest and mend both her vessel and her own fading light, before the silence of the clouds swallowed her whole. The gray mist parted to reveal a structure of weathered white stone, its arches entwined with glowing moss and clinging vines. It was a sanctuary, a forgotten way station, nestled deep within the heart of the stationary cloud. With a final, strained effort, Elara guided the wounded skiff through a crumbling archway and into a silent, open courtyard. The skiff settled onto the mossy floor with a soft crunch, its hum fading into a welcome stillness. The air here was different, thick with the scent of wet stone and ozone, but it was stable. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was on solid ground. In the courtyard's center, a pillar of crystalline rock rose from the floor, its core pulsing with a soft, golden light. A light well. It was a tiny, functioning piece of the old network, and she could feel its gentle energy washing over her tired form, a slow, soothing trickle of power seeping into her drained reserves. Yet the sanctuary was not silent. A low, melodic hum resonated through the halls, a haunting, beautiful, and deeply unsettling sound. It was not a single note, but a complex chord that seemed to phase in and out of harmony, creating pockets of dissonance that made the air itself feel thin and unstable. These were the echoes of the Shattering Song, a ghost of the catastrophic event that had silenced the temples. The sound did not attack her ears, but her perception, threatening to unravel her focus and disorient her sense of direction. The relief of finding shelter was instantly tempered by a new, insidious danger. She knelt by the light well, the warm glow pushing back the deep chill in her bones. But she did not close her eyes to block out the sound. Instead, she opened her mind to it. This was a risk, a deliberate choice to expose herself to the very force that had broken the sky. To fight an enemy, you must first learn its language. She focused her breathing, letting the strange melody wash over her, not as a threat, but as a text to be deciphered. She listened for its patterns, for the points where the harmony fractured and the discord bloomed. It was like trying to understand a storm by listening to the wind, a nearly impossible task that required absolute stillness within a torrent of chaos. The echoes were not random noise, she began to realize. They were a record, a story of that final, desperate moment frozen in sound. And within that story, she hoped, lay the secret to writing a different ending. The haunting melody was not a random collapse. It was a broken record, a sequence of notes that repeated with a deliberate, fractured precision. Elara focused her mind, pushing past the disorienting effect, and traced the pattern. There, buried in the shifting chords, was a flaw. It was a single, jarring interval that interrupted the flow, a discord that felt too structured, too intentional to be an accident. The Shattering Song was not a natural disaster or a well-intentioned mistake. It was sabotage, a cold dread, deeper than any she had felt before, washed over her. Someone with knowledge of the great resonance, a star builder like her, had deliberately introduced this poison into the cosmic symphony. The great silence that followed was not a failure. It was an act of violence against the heavens themselves, her own legacy. The very craft she had dedicated her life to was now shadowed by this terrible truth. Who could have done such a thing, and why? The trust she had placed in the history of her order crumbled into dust. This was no longer a simple quest to restart a machine. The temples were not dormant. They were wounded, infected with a harmonic poison that had to be purified before any reactivation could even be attempted. Her mission had transformed into something far more profound and terrifying. She had to heal a deliberate wound in the fabric of the cosmos. Her eyes scanned the sanctuary floor, settling on a piece of soft, pale stone that had fallen from a crumbling wall. With a sharp fragment of crystal, she began to scratch. She etched the corrupted sequence into the stone's surface, a visual record of the sonic flaw. The act was methodical, a desperate attempt to make this invisible treachery tangible. This evidence was everything. It was proof that the old story was a lie, and it was the key to diagnosing the illness in the stars. She had to preserve it, to carry this dark truth with her no matter the cost. The weight of the small stone in her hand felt heavier than the entire sky. To proceed now was to walk into a history of betrayal, armed only with the hope that a single song of healing could be stronger than the one that broke the world. The floating arches of the first temple materialized from the mist like the bones of a forgotten giant. Elara guided her skiff through a grand, open entryway, the structure's scale stealing her breath. It was a symphony in stone and crystal, a network of pathways and chambers, all suspended in perfect, impossible balance, humming with a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The central crystal, a monolith that should have blazed with the light of a captured star, was a void of absolute blackness at the heart of the majestic design. Awe washed over her, a deep reverence for the minds that could conceive of such a place, followed immediately by a crushing wave of sadness. This was not just a dead machine, it was a murdered work of art. The pressure to be the one to wake it was immense, a responsibility that tightened her chest. She forced her feet to move, her steps echoing in the vast emptiness. She ignored the tantalizing side chambers with their intricate, silent machinery, her focus narrowing to a single point. The central chamber called, a direct line to her objective. Every choice, every scrap of knowledge from the journal, every echo of the Shattering Song had led to this precipice. This was no longer a test of theory, but of action. To fail here was not just to fall personally, it was to extinguish the last, best hope for a dying sky. The great resonance crystal was a mountain of frozen light, but its heart was sick. A web of black, corrosive veins pulsed through its core, throbbing with the same discordant rhythm she had heard in the sanctuary. It was a living infection. As she reached out with a thread of her own starlight, the corruption recoiled. A sharp, painful jolt shot up her arm, repelling her energy with a force that felt both physical and mental, a defense mechanism of pure malice. The crystal was not dormant, it was poisoned, and it was fighting back. To force power into it would be to feed the very illness she sought to cure. She had to cleanse it, not overwhelm it. Her mind raced back to the pale stone in her pocket, to the flawed sequence she had etched into its surface. The answer was not in a greater force, but in a purer frequency. She closed her eyes, steadying her breathing against the painful feedback, still humming in her nerves. Then she began to sing. It was a single, clear note, a tone of perfect harmony, drawn from the deepest well of her own connection to the stars. She wove it into a simple, repeating melody, a direct counterpoint to the corrupted pattern. Her voice became her only tool, a fragile instrument against an ancient poison. For a moment, the black veins seemed to hesitate, their pulsing rhythm faltering. A flicker of hope ignited within her, but the corruption was not merely a pattern. It was a sentient defense. The black veins flared with a violent, dark light, and the entire temple groaned, a deep shudder passing through the stone floor and vibrating up into the crystal arches high above. The harmonious note she had sung was not accepted. It was identified as a threat. The temple, in its corrupted state, was now actively rejecting the healer. The shudder was not a sign of awakening, but of a system preparing to expel an intruder. Her attempt at a gentle cure had triggered a far more dangerous confrontation. The fractured light became a weapon. Jagged shards of dissonant energy erupted from the central crystal, solidifying into shimmering walls that slammed down to block her path. The air itself twisted, projecting terrifying illusions of crumbling floors and bottomless chasms where solid stone still remained. It was a symphony of defense, and every note was designed to expel her. Elara dove and rolled, her movements frantic. Small shields of her own starlight flared from her palms, deflecting the most aggressive beams, but each block drained her, the cold emptiness in her chest growing deeper. She found momentary refuge in the fleeting gaps between the light patterns, tiny safe zones that lasted only a heartbeat before the next onslaught began. She could not overpower this. A direct fight would only exhaust her completely, so she made a choice that felt like surrender. She stopped fighting the rhythm of the attack and started listening to it. She closed her eyes, shutting out the disorienting visuals, and focused only on the sound, on the rise and fall of the hostile hum. She was searching for the silence between the notes. It was an empathetic approach, a way of seeing the corruption not as a monster to be slain, but as a fever to be soothed. She found it, a tiny, consistent gap in the barrage. As the next wave of light prepared to lash out, she moved not away from it, but into that brief moment of quiet. The violent energy passed harmlessly over her, its lethal intent missing its mark because she was no longer where the pattern expected her to be. Progress was agonizingly slow, a series of tiny, precise steps, measured in heartbeats and harmonic intervals. The temple's defenses were fully awake now, the frequency of the attacks increasing. The window of the celestial alignment was shrinking with every passing second. Her greatest strength was no longer her power, but her patience, her willingness to understand the very sickness she had come to heal. Her hands, trembling from the strain, pressed flat against the cold stone of the temple wall. This was not a search for power, but for a ghost. She closed her eyes, letting her awareness sink past the surface, past the angry hum of the corrupted crystal. And then she felt it, a faint, impossibly pure vibration, a whisper of the original harmony locked deep within the stone itself. It was a memory of creation, a song of light. This empathic connection flooded her mind with a breathtaking revelation. The temples were not just tuning forks, maintaining a cosmic symphony. They were the composers. Their song did not merely sustain the stars, it wove new ones into being, spinning light from the raw fabric of the void. The sheer, beautiful responsibility of it was overwhelming. Now her mind became a fragile vessel for two warring realities. In one ear, she held the pristine, creative melody of the ancients. In the other, the jarring, sickened rhythm of the Sabotage. The effort to hold both at once was immense, a mental dissonance that felt like two opposing forces trying to tear her consciousness apart. A sharp, piercing headache bloomed behind her eyes, a physical symptom of the metaphysical war raging inside her. To find the solution, she had to understand the poison. With a courage born of absolute necessity, she made a choice. She lowered her final mental shields and opened herself completely, allowing the pure song and the corrupted one to clash directly within her. It was an act of profound empathy, and the pain was immediate and searing. Her vision swam, and a trickle of warmth traced a path from her nose. But in that crucible of agony, the truth became clear. The dissonance was not a complex chord. It was a single, wrong note, a frequency of pure silence that had been inserted like a knife into the song of creation. It was the note that muted the stars. The solution was now terrifyingly simple and terrifyingly personal. To heal the temple, she would have to become the one correct note and sing it into the heart of the corruption, knowing that the backlash could shatter the last of her own light. Her voice was a fragile thread in the cavernous silence, a single, unwavering note of pure harmony. She poured every last spark of her own light into it, focusing her entire being into this one offering. The sound was not loud, but it was impossibly clear, a perfect antithesis to the silent, corrosive flaw she had identified. As the note touched the heart of the great crystal, the black veins did not retreat. They shattered, exploding inward into a million glittering motes that evaporated into harmless, fading light. For a single, suspended moment, there was only silence. Then the crystal ignited. A soft, warm, brilliant glow bloomed from its core, flooding the chamber with a radiance that had been absent for generations. The effort cost her everything. The last of her energy spent, her legs gave way, and she collapsed to the cold stone floor, her vision dimming at the edges. Around her, the temple groaned, a deep, resonant sound of waking stone, as ancient machinery began to hum back to life. Its long sleep was ending. Lying there, utterly helpless, she faced a final, internal battle. The instinct to fight, to stay conscious and control the outcome, was a powerful urge, but she made a conscious choice to let go. She had to trust the process, to believe that her single, perfect note had been enough. It was a surrender, not to defeat, but to the hope she had reignited. The temple was awakening, its light spreading through the network of stone and crystal, a beacon in the darkened sky. But her success came with a terrifying vulnerability. She was alone and completely drained, unable to move or defend herself. The surge of energy from the reactivated temple would be a signal, a flare in the cosmic quiet. What other forces, dormant or watching, might now turn their attention to this place? Could the original saboteur, whoever they were, sense that their work was being undone? The victory was real, but it had just made her a visible target in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. A wave of pure, harmonious sound washed over her, a physical sensation of warmth and light that erased the deep chill of exhaustion. The temple's song flowed outwards, a visible ripple of energy cascading through the arches and into the darkened sky. In the vast distance, a pinpoint of light answered. Then another and another, like a chain of diamonds being strung across the heavens. Each flicker was a dormant temple, stirring from its long slumber, its own crystal igniting in sympathetic resonance as the great symphony began to rebuild itself. Elara watched, her body weak but her heart soaring, clinging to the hope that this fragile web of light would hold. She held her breath, waiting for a sign of resistance, for a flicker of the old corruption to snap a link in this beautiful, tenuous chain. With the last dregs of her strength, she lifted a trembling hand. A single, bright pulse of starlight shot from her fingertip, arcing across the void toward the distant glitter of her home city. It was the signal she had promised Lyra, a silent scream of success into the night. Above her, the very fabric of the sky was transforming. The stars, once faint and weary, now shone with a renewed, sharp intensity, their collective light pushing back the oppressive gloom. The scale of what was happening was almost too vast to comprehend. Her single note had not just awakened one temple, it had begun healing the entire celestial sphere. But with that global success came a terrifying new reality. The fate of the cosmos no longer rested on one temple, but on a network she could not possibly control. If the poison lingered in just one key junction, the entire reborn symphony could collapse into a silence deeper than the first. The sound of a second, smaller skiff settling on the temple floor broke the profound silence. Elara, too drained to even lift her head, saw the familiar, worn boots of her master approach. Master Kale knelt beside her, his hands gentle as he helped her to her feet, his own energy a steady, supportive presence that countered her profound weakness. He said nothing for a long moment, his gaze moving from her exhausted face to the fully awakened crystal, its light reflecting in his eyes. The stern disapproval she had expected was gone, replaced by a deep, complex emotion where regret and immense pride warred for dominance. The rigid hierarchy of master and apprentice, which had felt like an unbreachable wall in his observatory, simply dissolved in the radiant truth of what she had accomplished. There was no need for him to voice his error. The evidence of it hummed all around them. Elara felt no urge to claim victory. The cost of this knowledge was too great for gloating. Instead, she leaned against his steadying arm and spoke softly, her voice raspy. It was not an accident. The silence was a deliberate act. Someone poisoned the song. The confession shifted the very ground beneath them, transforming a story of tragic failure into one of chilling intent. The immediate danger had passed. The sky was healing, but her words opened a deeper, more frightening abyss. If the Great Dimming was an act of sabotage, then the enemy was not a forgotten mistake, but a conscious, hidden will. The person who did this understood the resonance as well as we do. They are likely still out there. The work is not finished. It has only just begun. Their shared focus was no longer on the single, glowing temple, but on the vast, newly lit network of stars above. Each point of light was now a potential target, and every awakened temple a question. Who would seek to unmake the universe, and what would they do when they discovered their vandalism was being undone? The city's familiar spires were almost unrecognizable, bathed in a starlight so clear and steady it seemed to polish the very air. A profound, gentle hum resonated through the streets, a stable energy that felt like a long, slow exhale after centuries of holding a breath. People gathered on balconies and walkways, their faces turned upward not in worry, but in quiet wonder, their laughter carrying a note of relief Elara had never heard before. They saw her, and their celebration turned toward her, a wave of grateful voices hailing the hero who had returned the sky. Each word of praise felt like a weight, a layer of separation between the person she had been and the one she had become in the vast, silent dark. The joyous routines of the Star Builders now seemed strangely small. Their celebratory rituals of performance she no longer knew how to join. How do you explain the taste of absolute solitude or the sound of a corrupted song to those who have only ever known the restored harmony? The structured life of the observatory felt like a cage, its orderly procedures unable to contain the wild, terrible truths she now carried. She sought a meeting with the Elder Council and Master Kale. Her request was simple, born not from ambition, but from a quiet, unshakable necessity. She would not return to her old duties. She asked for a new title, a new path. They agreed, and she was named Archivist Seeker, a role without precedent. Her mandate was to travel, to seek out the remaining lost knowledge scattered across the sky, and to serve as a guardian of the newfound peace. The appointment was celebrated as an honor, a fitting role for their savior, but for Elara, It was something far more profound. It was a formal goodbye to the life she had known, a purposeful step into the margins. It gave her the freedom she needed, the tools to continue her work, and a quiet, official sanction to pursue the question that now defined her. The search for the one who poisoned the song was no longer a personal secret. It was her sacred, solitary mission. The new archives were a sanctuary of quiet purpose, a place where Elara could finally listen to the whispers of the past. The soft rustle of a turning page was the only sound when Master Kale appeared in the doorway, his presence hesitant where it had once been so commanding. He did not offer congratulations or discuss the city's celebrations. Instead, he placed a small, locked metal box on the table between them. "I knew," he said, his voice low and heavy. "Not everything, but enough." The confession was not a flood, but a slow, painful unraveling. He spoke of fragmented records he had discovered decades ago, scrolls that hinted not at a tragic miscalculation, but at a deliberate severing of the great resonance. He had pieced together a terrifying possibility, a shadow in their history, and in his fear, he made a choice. He ordered the most dangerous fragments destroyed and the rest buried, believing that the truth would only shatter the people's hope and lead to a panic that could destroy the city faster than any fading light. His greatest failure, he admitted, was not in misreading the ancient texts, but in underestimating the courage of his own apprentice. A storm of emotions warred within Elara. The anger was a sharp, hot blade. His secrecy had forced her into solitude, had made her a criminal in her own home, and had very nearly cost the universe its last chance. Yet, as she watched the deep regret etched on his face, she also saw the immense weight he had carried alone. His was not the arrogance of control, but the terrible burden of a protector who chose a slow, known decline over the chaos of a terrifying truth. The choice before her was stark. She could hold on to her righteous anger, letting it become a new wall between them, or she could understand that his silence, however misguided, came from the same place as her own journey, a profound desire to shield their home from harm. She looked from the box of suppressed knowledge to the man who had been her teacher, and she made her decision. "I accept your apology, Master Kale," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But we cannot hide from this any longer. I need your knowledge, and the city needs us to work together." She offered him not a return to his old authority, but a new partnership as equals in the search. The relief that washed over his features was palpable. With his official sanction and the full resources of the Star Builders Guild now behind her, the hunt was transformed. No longer a solitary seeker chasing whispers, Elara now commanded a systematic inquiry into the past. They would cross-reference construction logs, energy signatures, and personal histories from the era of the Great Silence. The shadow they pursued was no longer a ghost. It was a historical figure, a person with a name and a motive, and they were now officially looking for them. The grand tapestry shimmered in the heart of the city's main square, a breathtaking narrative woven from threads that drank the light of the restored stars. Ven, his hands still stained with luminous dye, presented it to Elara with a deep bow. It depicted her perilous flight, the dark silhouette of the first temple, and the brilliant cascade of its awakening, all glowing with a soft, internal fire. The crowd that gathered around it murmured in awe, their faces illuminated by its gentle radiance. It was more than a work of art. It was a physical memory, a symbol of their deliverance that everyone could see and touch. Yet, as Elara stood before her own story, rendered in such magnificent detail, a profound discomfort settled in her chest. The adoration in the people's eyes was directed at her, the single figure in the center of the cloth, while the true heroes, the ancient builders and the silent temples, were relegated to the background. The focus was on the singer, not the song. She felt the weight of a new kind of isolation, one built not on secrecy, but on a pedestal she had never asked to stand upon. She turned to Fen, her gratitude genuine, but her voice carrying a new, quiet authority. "Your craft has given our city a beautiful heart," she told him. "But the true glory belongs to the harmony we have restored and to the ones who first composed it. For your next masterpiece, would you weave the story of the first builders? Let the threads sing of their original vision, not just of my small part in its recovery." Her request was not a rejection of his gift, but a gentle redirection of the city's newfound inspiration. By shifting the narrative from a single hero to a collective legacy, she mended a potential tear in their social fabric before it could widen. Her humility resonated deeply, transforming public veneration into a shared sense of purpose. Soon, other artisans followed Fen's lead. Potters glazed their urns with patterns that mirrored the star map, and glassblowers captured the essence of the temple's light in swirling, crystalline forms. A cultural rebirth bloomed across the city, its roots firmly planted in the rediscovered knowledge of the past. This flourishing of art and craft was a powerful defense, a living testament to the stability of the renewed sky. But it also presented a new vulnerability. How long could this fragile peace last if the one who poisoned the first song saw this vibrant celebration as a provocation? A small, hesitant shadow fell across the stone table where Elara studied. She looked up to find a child, no older than she had been when she first apprenticed, clutching a lopsided model of a temple crafted from polished wood and bits of stray crystal. The boy, Corin, met her gaze with an unnerving directness, his bright eyes wide with a mix of fear and wonder. He held out his creation like an offering. "I made this from the stories," he whispered. "Can you teach me the old songs?" The question, so simple and profound, struck her with the force of a physical blow. In his face, she saw the ghost of her own relentless curiosity, the same desperate need to understand the music of the world. The realization was a sudden, heavy mantle settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a seeker or a guardian. She had become the bridge, the sole keeper of a living tradition that now demanded to be passed forward. A cold wave of doubt washed over her. Who was she to be a teacher? Her own knowledge was so new, so painfully won, and still shadowed by the unsolved mystery of the Saboteur. The journals of the first builders spoke with the calm authority of centuries, while her own understanding felt like a fragile, flickering candle in a vast hall. What if her interpretations were flawed? What if, in her well-meaning guidance, she inadvertently planted the same seeds of fear that had once silenced the sky? The risk of leading this fresh, eager mind astray felt more terrifying than any shard storm. Corin stood patiently, his hope undimmed, his clumsy temple held tight. In that silence, Elara understood that withholding knowledge out of fear was its own form of loss. It was the very path that had led to the great dimming. She could not let the song die with her. Reaching out, she took the model from his hands, her touch gentle. "It is a fine temple, Corin," she said, her voice soft but clear. The old songs are not just notes to be memorized. They are stories of balance, of listening. They require as much empathy as skill. Are you ready to learn how to listen? His eager nod was all the answer she needed. In that moment, a new school was born, not within the formal halls of the Star Builders Guild, but in the quiet space between a seeker and her first student. Its foundation would be built not on rigid doctrine, but on the principles she had discovered in the darkness: exploration, empathy, and the courage to trust a single, true note. The future of their knowledge, once so perilously close to extinction, now had a new, growing root, ensuring that even if one light went out, others would remain to sing the stars back to life. The observatory hummed with a familiar, comforting rhythm as Elara and Master Kale worked in focused silence, their hands moving in unison to fine-tune the city's primary lens. The stable light of the restored stars flowed through the crystal, a serene and predictable energy. Then, without warning, a flicker disrupted the calm. It was a single, faint pulse, a heartbeat of data from a sector of the sky that every map labeled as an empty void. Elara's hands stilled, her entire attention locking onto the anomaly. It resonated with a harmonic signature that was hauntingly similar to their own temples, yet its texture was entirely foreign, woven with frequencies and intervals she had never encountered. It felt like hearing a distant relative speak a language you almost understand, but whose words are just beyond your grasp. The discovery was a tremor that shook the very foundations of their understanding. They were not alone in the art of celestial song. Another culture, another network of builders had existed, and perhaps still did, in the vast, uncharted dark. A heavy silence filled the observatory, thick with unspoken questions. Master Kale's first instinct was one of profound caution. "Our harmony is still new, Elara," he said, his voice low with concern. To reach out blindly could introduce a variable we cannot control. What if this signal is not a greeting, but a warning, or the echo of a catastrophe we are unprepared to face? The safety of our own sky must be our priority. Elara understood his fear, the protective instinct forged by his long years bearing the burden of leadership. To chase this mystery was to risk the beautiful, fragile peace they had just won. Yet, to ignore it was to choose willful ignorance, to build their future on a foundation of fear. She had learned in the heart of the Poison Temple that true understanding required courage, not isolation. "We do not need to reach out," she replied, her gaze fixed on the flickering data stream. "But we cannot look away. We can listen. We can learn its rhythm, its patterns, and its nature. Knowledge is our best defense." Her decision was a testament to her growth. The impulsive apprentice who had once climbed the celestial spire alone was gone, replaced by a patient seeker. She established a dedicated watch on the distant pulse, programming the observatory's instruments to record its every fluctuation, to map its cadence against the known music of their own temples. It was a strategy of quiet, respectful observation, a way to expand their world without provoking a conflict they could not yet comprehend. This new approach, however, came with its own profound escalation. The canvas of their existence had just expanded exponentially. Every point of light in the healed sky was now a potential gateway, and every silent void on their charts held the possibility of another civilization, with its own history, its own triumphs, and perhaps its own hidden saboteurs. The story of the Star Builders was no longer just about safeguarding their own song. It had become a prologue to a much larger, more complex symphony, one whose next movement was still a mystery written in the silent spaces between the stars. The seeds were unlike any Elara had ever seen, each one a tiny, dormant vessel of potential light. She and Corin worked the soft soil of a high, open terrace, planting them not in rows, but in flowing patterns that mirrored the constellations on her old moss-stained map. This was not a simple garden. It was an experiment in living resonance, an attempt to translate the celestial symphony into a form they could see, touch, and feel growing beside them. Each plant responded to a different harmonic thread in the sky's great song. As Elara hummed a specific, clear note, a cluster of slender silver stalks would shiver and begin to glow with a soft, blue-white light. A lower, warmer tone from Corin encouraged a patch of broad-leafed flora to pulse with a gentle golden radiance. Slowly, painstakingly, the dark earth became a tapestry of responsive light, a living mirror of the heavens above. It was beautiful, a dancing, breathing map of the cosmic balance they had fought so hard to restore. But beauty, they quickly learned, demanded constant attention. The garden was a fragile ecosystem of sound. A note held a fraction too long would make the corresponding plants flare too brightly, their leaves beginning to curl at the edges with the strain. An interval sung slightly out of tune would cause a patch of light to flicker and dim, threatening to go dark entirely. Maintaining the garden was a lesson in exquisite patience, a daily meditation on the delicate art of listening and responding. It tested Elara's resolve, forcing her to slow her seeker's mind to the rhythm of growth, and it challenged Corin's fledgling control, his young voice learning to find and hold a steady pitch for minutes at a time. Watching him struggle one afternoon, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to soothe a jittery patch of luminous moss, Elara felt a familiar protective urge. She could easily take over, her own power more than sufficient to calm the plant, but that would teach him nothing. Instead, she made a conscious choice to step back. She assigned him the care of the smaller, more responsive plants, giving him a domain of his own within their shared project. It was a small delegation, but for Corin, it was a profound vote of confidence. The responsibility settled on his small shoulders not as a burden, but as a purpose. He began to arrive early, singing to his charges, learning their individual quirks and needs. This garden, with its gentle demands and radiant rewards, became more than a tool. It stood as a quiet symbol of their new relationship with the cosmos, a testament that harmony was not a state to be achieved and forgotten, but a living process that required daily, mindful participation. Its thriving beauty was entirely dependent on their constant, gentle care, a delicate balance that, if neglected, would fade back into silent, ordinary soil. The peace they had won was not a permanent victory, but a living thing they had to choose to nurture every single day. The resonance garden became more than a lesson. It became a blueprint. Elara watched the way light flowed through the living plants, a network of individual points, creating a stable, collective glow, and a new vision took root in her mind. An archive should not be a vault where knowledge sleeps, she decided, but a garden where it lives. She proposed a radical project to the council, a new kind of library, built not from fragile parchment, but from resonant crystals, each one a vessel for the pure songs and memories of their people. These would not be silent records, but living echoes of their entire history. Master Kale, humbled by the past, was the first to contribute. He stood before a blank, receptive crystal and sang the foundational frequencies of the great resonance. His voice, once so stern, now filled with a reverent warmth. Other senior builders followed, adding their specialized knowledge of atmospheric currents and crystal geometry. Soon, the Archive of Echoes was born, a chamber where light and sound danced in perfect harmony, a living library accessible to any citizen who wished to listen and learn. Yet, the sheer concentration of active harmonic energy in one location sparked a quiet unease. Some builders remembered the journals and voiced a chilling concern. Was this not creating a single, immense target? Could a new shattering song, if one were ever sung here, erase their entire cultural memory in an instant? The technical challenge was immense, but the psychological one was greater. Elara had anticipated this fear. She did not design a single, mighty crystal to hold everything. Instead, she engineered a decentralized network. Each memory crystal was self-contained, yet subtly linked to the others in a supportive web. A fail-safe, drawn from the painful lesson of the poisoned temple, was woven into the design. If any one crystal was corrupted, its connection to the network would sever automatically, isolating the flaw before it could spread. The archive was not a fortress, but a community designed to withstand the very betrayal that had once broken the world. This achievement secured their knowledge against ever being lost again, a permanent victory against the silence. But success, as Elara was learning, always casts a long shadow. The Archive of Echoes began to pulse with a unique energy signature, a beacon of stability and advanced resonance that other floating cities could not ignore. Emissaries and scholars from distant, isolated enclaves started to arrive, their skiffs dotting the sky as they came to witness this marvel. Their influence was expanding, drawing the gaze of strangers. And in doing so, their small, restored city was no longer just a haven. It was becoming a center of power in a sky where power had so recently been used to destroy. The steady hum of the Archive of Echoes fractured into a jarring, chaotic screech. The light in the resonance garden flickered wildly, the plants recoiling as if in physical pain. Across the city, the gentle music of the temples faltered, their stable glow dimming under the assault of a screaming dissonance, flooding in from the void. This was not a mere anomaly anymore. It was a wave of pure agony, a sound that felt like the universe itself was tearing apart. Panic surged through the observatory. Master Kale moved to shield their central crystal, his face a mask of grim certainty. "It is an attack," he stated, his voice tight. "We must sever the connection before it poisons our entire network." But Elara stood frozen, her hands pressed to her ears, not to block the noise, but to listen more deeply. Within the overwhelming scream, she detected a pattern, a structure of pure, unadulterated desperation. This was not a weapon, it was a cry for help. The pain echoing across the stars was a mirror of their own past, a civilization caught in the same catastrophic failure. its song shattering from the inside out. They were not being invaded, they were being asked for a lifeline. The choice was terrifyingly simple, and it rested solely on her. To send their entire library of healing songs, every frequency and harmonic solution they had rediscovered, would be to project the sum total of their knowledge into the unknown. It would drain their city's energy reserves to a dangerous low, leaving them vulnerable and dim for a crucial period. It was a gamble with their own survival to save a stranger they had never met. To do nothing was to condemn another world to the slow, silent death they had only narrowly escaped. There was no time for debate. "I am sorry, Master Kale," she said, her voice calm amidst the storm of sound, "but we cannot turn away." She turned from the protective console and stepped into the center of the archive of echoes. Raising her hands, she did not draw power from the city, but asked for it. She became a conduit, her will a catalyst that connected every willing heart, every stored song of healing in the living crystals. A collective breath seemed to hold across the city as she focused their combined hope into a single, immense act of empathy. Then she released it, a wave of pure, harmonious light, containing the entire musical history of their recovery, shot into the void, a river of answers sent toward the scream of the question. For a heart-stopping moment, their own city lights flickered, the energy drain palpable. The screaming dissonance from the void intensified, as if the alien system was rejecting the unfamiliar cure. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise transformed. The agonized scream softened, then broke, reshaping itself into a grateful, harmonizing reply. It was a new song, woven from their own melodies and the unique voice of the other, a beautiful, complex chord of peace and understanding that resonated across the impossible distance. They were no longer alone in the dark, and their quiet sky now held a friendly, answering voice. The sky now holds a dual symphony, its familiar hum beautifully intertwined with the curious, complex melodies from the distant builders. Elara stood in the resonant garden, the light from the living plants pulsing softly in time with both cosmic songs. Corin was at her side, his young voice now steady and true as he hummed along, while Master Kale watched with a quiet pride that needed no words. She was no longer just a star builder, or even a solitary seeker. She had become a bridge, a living connection between worlds that had once believed themselves alone in the vast, silent dark. Her journey had begun with a single, forbidden climb, driven by a desperate need to know why the stars were failing. It led her through forgotten archives and poisoned temples, through the terrifying solitude of the abyss, and the painful discovery of a hidden betrayal. Each challenge had carved away the person she was, revealing the architect of cosmic harmony she was meant to become. The forgotten knowledge she recovered was not a weapon to be hoarded or a tool for control. It was a gift, and her greatest act was the compassion with which she chose to share it, sending their hard-won songs of healing across the void to answer a cry of despair. That single act of empathy did not just save another world, it forever expanded and enriched her own, weaving their story into a much larger, more beautiful tapestry. The future is now wide open, not as a blank page of uncertainty, but as a starlit map of infinite possibility. It invites not conquest, but gentle discovery, a promise that the next great song is still waiting to be heard, and that the most important journeys always begin with the courage to listen.